Hello, dear Yaqub. How are you doing?
Okay, thank you.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's pretty late at night, I guess, where you are.
Yeah, it is 11 in the night. So in winter days, almost, it's really almost midnight.
Okay, it's a little earlier over here in Israel. It's just 8 o'clock at nighttime. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. How are you doing nowadays?
Okay. Okay. This, being at home a lot is a mixed blessing with the virus and everything. My shop opens a few hours in the afternoon, and some people come by. Things are pretty quiet, and I'm able to focus on projects. We have a Hebrew translation of Hafiz, the Persian Sufi poet,
Yeah,
coming out soon. So I've been very busy with that lately. So
that's
there's what
great.
to do. Yeah.
I got to know about your shop that there is a, it was it was kind of informal introduction that there is a Sufi bookshop in Jerusalem. And there is a Jewish Sufi who is running this with very great motivation and with a deep love with Sufism. So I got interested in that, and then I discussed it with my friends, and then I got connected with you and requested you to appear in my podcast. uh, let's begin from the story where it begins. uh, where you born, how you raised up, and how you got interested in Sufism.
Okay, I'd be happy to. A word about my bookshop. The adjective that I'm used to using for my bookshop is a spiritual bookshop.
Hmm.
And I was living in Canada before I came to Israel, in Winnipeg, Canada. And I
Okay.
opened a spiritual bookshop with a couple of friends there. And we had a Jewish section and a Sufi section, and a lot of Buddhism and yoga, etc., and New Age. And that was the basic idea for my bookstore here, except that there would be an emphasis on the Jewish section and also the Sufi section,
Hmm.
uh, both because of my personal interest and because we're here in Israel, and
Hmm.
also a small Christian section. Uh,
Hmm.
so those things are important. The New Age was much bigger some years ago than it is today, I would say. But okay, etc. So that's just a little bit about my bookshop. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, okay. You
And
want to
about
know?
your personal life? Yeah, yeah, of course, I want to know everything.
Okay. So I was born in a very warm Jewish home in Brooklyn, New York. My
Great.
parents, I would say, were seekers. They both came from modern religious families, and
Mm-hmm.
they were the Jewish seekers in each of their respective families. They, before I was born, they were recruited to help in the War of Independence of Israel in 1948, and they came to Israel to help. And they made a
Mm-hmm.
very wise calculation, I think, that being as they weren't Orthodox Jews and they weren't secular, just secular
Mm-hmm.
Zionists or something, that they should come back to America, that they
Hmm.
could do their spiritual search, their religious search in Judaism in America much better in those days than in Israel. Because
Hmm.
in Israel it was either or. Um, and this is something I've also noticed about Turkey in particular, which is a country I feel a strong connection to. This kind of, I call it schizophrenia between secular and religious. People tend to be either or, although both both streams are very important for many of us and have
Hmm.
contributions to make. Um, so that's just a bit of general background.
Hmm.
And my mother was a Bible teacher, studying archaeological perspectives, historical perspectives, literary perspectives from rabbinic literature, but basically seeing in the Bible stories very human stories about our own search. And she was a wonderful teacher. I went to a Jewish day school, and she was actually brought in as a special teacher when I was in seventh and eighth grade. It was my great delight to be able to formally study with my mom.
Hmm.
And my dad, in those years, became convinced that he wasn't satisfied just being a businessman, and
Hmm.
he went to rabbinical school and he became ordained as a rabbi. In those
Hmm.
days, people in their 30s with a family didn't do that, but he did,
Hmm.
and had a congregation in Connecticut for 11 years, and then they came back to Israel in 1976. the same summer that I came here searching for a spiritual master. So this just brings us back a little bit to my story. So
you came to Israel to search a spiritual master?
yeah. Before that, I was before a couple of communities. There was an alternative. I'm talking the early 70s, very much in the spirit of the 60s. Bob Dylan and the Beatles were very much in the air, and San Francisco scene, all of that. And there was a wonderful alternative Jewish community in Boston, Chavurah, which was kind of spiritually oriented and very open-ended. But they were all graduate students, and I was a college dropout. I was trying to follow Tim Leary, tune in, drop out. So I'm here for the revolution. Sign me up. Where do we go? So in Boston, there was a while I was working for an organic bakery and hanging around the Chavurah. But they were academics, and I could speak with them, but I was trying to avoid going to college. Then I hitchhiked out to the West Coast, and I hung around with the Shlomo Carlebach community, the House of Love and Prayer, and they were making a wonderful synthesis of kind of hippie culture, macrobiotic food, little yoga in the morning, Jewish prayer. But when I asked them, how do you decide how to make your synthesis between Judaism and everything else, they were sort of embarrassed. No, we're Baalei Tshuva, we're penitents, we're newly religious. I said, guys, you're much more creative than that. Give me a break. And I realized I could do with them, but I couldn't talk to them because they didn't want to reflect intellectually at all on what they were doing. They just wanted to do it. And I enjoyed it, but it wasn't fulfilling for me. It was too intellectual on the East Coast, and it was not intellectual enough on the West Coast. And this great figure, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who I heard of in both coasts and actually met on both coasts, invited me to be part of a Jewish spiritual community. It would be like an ashram, but it would be the main language, the main focus would be Jewish in Winnipeg, Canada. And I came to kind of the north point in the compass from the east and the west to Winnipeg, right in the middle of North America, but pretty far north, pretty cold winters. Snow comes in the fall, it doesn't melt till the spring. And I lived there for 17 years. He left and I stayed, but I very seriously became his student. And then what I discovered with him, basically, he laid all kinds of spiritual food out on the table. There are, the Jewish development in close to modern times that's closest to Sufism is Hasidism. That's the dynamic movement of discipleship to a master and music and dance and prayer and as well as teachings, also teachings by stories. And in Hasidism, there are two currents that are powerful today. One is Chabad, Lubavitcher Hasidism, which you rouse up your emotions, and they can be very emotional. There's a Chabad synagogue right beneath my apartment here, and they sing a lot. But basically, you convince your intellect that Judaism is the true way, and this is the true path. And Chabad kind of bridged the Zohar, the classic work of Kabbalah, and the Rambam, the great Jewish philosopher, and kind of an amazing thing, impressive thing intellectually, but it's pretty intellect. And it never really spoke to me. And Zalman would put out Chabad teaching on the table. And Zalman was very pluralistic within Judaism and also comparing traditions. So I learned some Chabad, and I saw it didn't work for me. And then he put out some teachings of Rebbe Nahman of Wroclaw. And Rebbe Nahman gives your intellect a bit of a workout. He's not for simpletons, but he speaks to the heart, or what in Sufism we might call the creative imagination. If you know the book Creative Imagination in the Sufism of Ibn Arabi, the imagination is what gets it or doesn't get it. It's not logical proofs. You have to get the feeling of it. Your heart has to understand it. Your intellect serves your heart. It's the point. Your intellect serves your heart. And I discovered I belong to those guys, where the intellect serves the heart. I have a very good intellect, but I got to get it in the heart. Otherwise, I don't get it. And so I feel with Reb Nachman's kind of teaching. And Reb Nahman, at the center of his universe, was the figure of the Tzaddiq, of the spiritual master. In Sufism, we speak of al-insan al-kamil, the complete human being. And it's basically the same idea in Jewish mysticism. Actually, the Baal Shem Tov used the term Ha'adam Shalem, which means the complete human being. He was the man who inspired the whole Hasidic movement, but the usual Jewish term is the Tzaddiq, literally the righteous human being, but meaning somebody who is a bridge, who is a channel between heaven and earth, between God and the creation. And the Tzaddiq is something you find, there are people like this, and it's possible to study with them. And it's also a potential in each human being. So those are the basic ideas I got from Rebbe Nahman, and I said, yes, I get it. I'm interested. When I went to study with Zalman, I was more looking for a community than I was looking for a teacher. But what I got from Rebbe Nahman was, oh, you need a spiritual master. And I got a pretty clear description of how he functions, what it's like, what it's about, what to look for. In very Jewish terms, I answered the question of whether, spirituality and Judaism were conflict, or whether it was one and the same. I found a universal spiritual teaching in a very Jewish expression, and that relieved me, that resolved that question. You don't have to choose between Judaism and spirituality. I found the theoretical teaching that spoke to me, but now how do we put it into action? How do we follow it? And Reb Zalman was a wonderful teacher, but he was always comparing. He was very complex. He was very lavish. And I was looking for something simple and deep, and I wasn't quite getting it there. So instead of going to India to look for a guru, I came to Israel to look for maybe a Kabbalist, maybe a Hasidic rabbi, maybe some kind of Sufi. I didn't know. I remember on the flight over to Israel, I wrote in my notebook about coming to meet the dark side, coming to meet the rejected side, and I didn't know what that meant. I got here, and I'll make a long story short. I was introduced to somebody who supposedly knew all the gurus in Israel, and she recommended a Hasidic rabbi in the school of Rebbe Nahman. She recommended a Zen Roshi from Japan who was living on the Mount of Olives. And she recommended this Sufi Sheikh, who she said he seems quite powerful. He's also quite traditional, but with your conservative Jewish background, maybe that won't be a problem. And I think I understood that has a double meaning. On the one hand, I'm not afraid of tradition. I love Jewish tradition. I'm open to other traditions. Tradition's not a problem for me. On the other hand, I'm never going to be an Orthodox Jew. We don't have to worry about you becoming a fanatical Orthodox Muslim. That's right. Not. We can trust you to go there and get something good from it. And okay, so he was the teacher I found. I could make a longer story, but let's just go to there at this point. One of the early conversations, we was talking about distinguishing the place of God within yourself and the place of the servant within yourself. That made a lot of sense to me, just that we need to be aware of that distinction. It's not about the ego, but God is within. And the words jumped out of my mouth, but I want to serve God. And so he said, yes, beloved, but the order not come. But, oh my God, did I just say I wanted to be his student? Did I say that? And okay. Each time I came, I actually met another Jewish seeker on the way and brought him along with me. And he kind of expressed all the reservations, and they said, come again, but don't bring somebody this time. I said, I understand, no problem. I came back, and Sidi received me very warmly, and he said, beloved, the order has come. You can come, and you can stay, and you can walk station after station to be complete and more complete, if you like. If I like. Holy, what do I do now? So I said yes. And he spoke about, if anyone knows their religion well, there will be one religion, the religion of the love and the truth. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm going to learn Sufi discipline and come out a rabbi. I studied with a Buddhist teacher who used to call me the Buddhist rabbi. He had no trouble with my being Jewish and incorporating my Buddhism into my Judaism. It wasn't a satisfying path for me, but, there was no political issue between us at all, He said, just be a rabbi with awareness. Awareness, that's hard. Yes. On
That's
that,
right.
he wasn't letting up. That's the name of the game. Okay, good. So I thought, I was introduced to Islamic prayer, and
Mm.
as a spiritual practice, it worked for me. I had actually discovered spontaneously, I discovered prostration in my Buddhist. I did a 3-month retreat. And at one point when I was really desperate, I just lay myself on the floor and gave it all up to, who is it? God? What is it? What are we? And I felt this channel open up in myself. And, oh, spiritual path really is within. Oh, okay. And then I felt this little voice of guidance saying, get up and continue your practice, your walking meditation. I thought, oh, I think I can trust that. So that was all in my background. That was in the fall of the spring that I went and met Sidi Sheikh Mohammed.
Mm.
So, and the Arabic, most of it wasn't that difficult. The Unity Sutra, I could translate into Hebrew very easily. And there was a penetrating quality to the Islamic prayer that I really appreciated. Looking at the point where your head's going to hit the carpet and
Yeah.
staying focused. So it was fine with me as a practice. But Friday nights, I'd still go out and watch the sunset and welcome the Sabbath bride. And it didn't seem like I was converting from one religion to another. It did seem like I was practicing a tradition that I have great respect for. But I could never talk. Zalman gave me a good Yiddish term, to talk tachlis, to get down to earth. Okay, bottom line, Sidi, I'm Jewish. Can I be your student or not? I'm not going to convert to Islam. I'm happy to do Islamic prayer. I'm happy to fast Ramadan. I make up the Sabbaths and any holidays afterwards, which is, acceptable from an Islamic point of view. If you have to miss some days, you may come up later. I was doing Islamic prayer. I was trying to get in my 5 prayers a day, every day of the week. Not always making them all 5, but I understand that I'm in good company with lots of Muslims who, not everybody makes all 5 prayers, Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Okay, something to work with. And on the Sabbath, I prayed in Hebrew. I did the 3 big Jewish prayers, and I thought about practicing, doing 8 prayers a day. But then I thought, hey, I'm not that saintly. I'm still running after women 8 times a day. That's not genuine. There's a role for the daily prayer in each tradition. So let's do 5 a day during weekdays and 3 Jewish prayers on Shabbat, on Sabbath. And to me, it seemed to fit. And I never got the signal from Sidi that it was okay. On the contrary, we would sit down and he would talk about the perfect surrender to the perfect, prophet. And anyway, I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for completion. That was a little problem in how we looked at things, maybe. But I couldn't, he would take you to a place where we were just in this field of love and the questions would all disappear. And then he would say, what was your question, beloved? And so I couldn't, say, bottom line, Sidi, can I be your student and remain Jewish? Because this isn't working. And I got more and more frustrated with the years. Instead of going deeper and deeper, it went very deep at the beginning. We were writing by hand these descriptions of the stations of the path. And I was experiencing at least a good part of what I was writing about. And it was a tremendous initiation. I'm very grateful for it. But it got more and more frustrating with the years. And I had friends in Boston who had a Sufi teacher in Vermont, Kabir Helminski, who was a Mevlevi Sheikh. And he invited me when I was in Israel one time to come over to Turkey and meet some sheikhs and some real dervishes. We can talk about sheikhs and we can talk about being a dervish, but it's not just a matter of signing up. There's an art to being a dervish. Not everybody who thinks they are is. It's something you have, something to learn, something to encounter, and I met some wonderful, wonderful people in Turkey. I felt, broadly speaking, very at home in the world of Turkish Sufism. I was not so satisfied with the Inayati Sufism in America. I was a little too universal, a little too philosophical. The perfection of love, harmony, and beauty didn't really speak to me. God speaks to me a little more than that. But I felt very at home in the world of Turkish Sufism. And back in North America, Kabir invited me to a gathering at his place on the Way of Navlana, Way of Rumi. I see you have a whirling dervish on the wall behind you. And he had just published the autobiography of this wild, cantankerous Turkish character, Murat Yagan. And he sent me the copy of the book. He said, read the last chapter called What is Sufism? And I saw a serious approach to Sufism that in some sense had an objective aspect, like from the Gurdjieff teaching or something. But it also had warmth, it had prayer, it had love, and it had a sense of humor, which I'd been lacking with my Sheikh, sense of humor. And then he and Kabir let us know that the author of this book, Murat Yagan, would be at this gathering. And I said, oh, this is the next step. And it was. And I became Murat's teacher. I actually had a chance to show Murat a copy of a teaching I translated from Rebbe Nahman about the role of the spiritual master. So he knew what I was looking for. I never had a chance like that with Sidi. And the years with Murat were not easy. He was a very tough character. But there was lots of learning and lots of good fellowship with the other students. So he was first in Vancouver and then in Vernon, British Columbia. I was in Winnipeg. I'd stayed in Winnipeg. So it made it, it was a long trip, but, 1,500 miles or something, but within Canada at least. And he was adjusting his teaching to the culture of North America. And at the same time, he himself had a very strong connection to Jesus, but he spoke in Sufi terms of rabita, of point of contact. He didn't privilege Jesus over other prophets or saints. It was more a matter of finding a connection that spoke to you, because they're all connected anyway. They're not in competition. And I found a path. So I really found a contemporary spiritual path with Murat. And I took it on myself. We learned, I started a group in Winnipeg, which suited me well because I wasn't that personally attached to Murat, and he was a bit of a difficult character, and I was very happy to have access to his teaching at a little bit of a distance and work with my own circle of friends and learn how to become a teacher myself. It was a rocky road. It was not easy. But Murat had a student under him who was the leader of the group, and we had a wonderful relationship. First it was Dr. Allen, and then ultimately he couldn't stay with Murat, and with somebody else named Dr. Ralph Mattis. But I had a very good friendship, older brother, younger brother relationship with both of those fellows, and something I really appreciated I got from Murat. He prepared that. So I eventually took those piles of transcripts of Murat's conversations with the group in Canada, in British Columbia, and from my experience of which transcripts to present to the group, and both what was suggested from the main group and from my own experience, and from my experience doing my own translations of Rebbe Nahman, kind of how to edit Murat's words so that the meaning comes through, not so that you change the meaning, but just getting the obstacles out of the way. I put together a book of his teachings. It was a huge project, but it was something I felt needed doing. And ultimately, I had a falling out with him, and I was no longer his student. And even after I was no longer his student, he supported me, he encouraged me in making a new edition of his book. He said, even if people steal my teachings, I just want to see that some good comes out of what I've done. So he somehow we appreciated each other. So let me pause there. That was a whole lot at once. I wish should be a conversation, but that's how I got into Sufism.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah. What would you
And
like
then
to
you
know?
resettled. Then you again resettled to Israel, or you started. You went back to America.
No, so I was in Canada. Zalman left. I went to Canada to study with Zalman. He left. It was a pretty comfortable New Year's. I was a Muslim Jewish Sufi. Canada is a good place to be because they're so tolerant of cultures. I remember I went to do some photocopying at the photocopy shop, and it was a charismatic Christian who ran the shop. And he saw, Sufi, Jewish. I said, yeah, I'm kind of both. He said, well, Sufism, Judaism, That's about the prophets, isn't it? I said,
Hmm.
yes, you got it. So this doesn't have to be an issue. Thank you. Yes, it's about the prophets. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes. So so Canada was a good place to be.
Hmm.
When I left Sidi, he kind of warned me. He set me free, but he said, in your own country, not in this country. And as it worked out, 7 years after I left him, I didn't go much to Israel except to visit my parents. Sometimes would lead the services at their synagogue, especially for the high holidays.
Hmm.
But 7 years later, I discovered, I went back to Rebbe Nahman. I wanted to bring forward his teaching about the Tzaddiq. I was working on a master's thesis at university in Canada, and I discovered really the creative scholar who I could sort of trust to help guide me into a vision that would be authentic to the Jewish sources, but would not be kind of, I would say in Hebrew, Barosh Katan, wouldn't be small-minded. Gershom Scholem, the big scholar before him, was a little bit too much involved in finding non-Jewish sources for Judaism, for Jewish mysticism, such as Gnosticism, etc. Then Jewish Gnostic scholars were talking about the Jewish sources of Gnosticism. Gets a little confusing. Idel was very prepared to see Jewish sources of Kabbalah. He wasn't allergic to non-Jewish sources, but he was very ready to see the Jewish sources. And I felt he was a scholar I could trust and I could apprentice with. And I took a course with him in New York, in the same seminary where my dad had graduated as a rabbi. Took a summer course with Idel, and he invited me to follow him to Jerusalem, which is what I had in mind, kind of. And I came to Jerusalem and went to study at the Hebrew University and immersed myself in, studying Kabbalah in Hebrew. It was very challenging, academic study. My Hebrew is good, but not that good. I'm better at reading text than I am in modern Hebrew, or I was at that time. But I came to Israel, and I found myself very at home here. Once I was here, I came as a student, but it was like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm home. Being a Sufi who keeps the Sabbath, my bookstore in Canada, I had to apologize. My partners, I had two partners. One of them said, you're not that good with the ordering and the business end of stuff, but you're very good with the customers. Saturday is the day of hanging out with the customers. Why don't you work on Saturdays? And I was like, no, it's Shabbat, man. There's no way. I don't work on Shabbat. And that was a bit uncomfortable. And I wanted to live where I could keep Shabbat in an authentic way that wasn't pulling against the fabric of my culture, because my Sufism somehow said something about appropriateness, even my secular Sufism from Murat, of, fitting your culture, not imposing a religious thing on it. And in Jerusalem, on Shabbat, everybody relaxes. Majority of people in Jerusalem don't drive their cars. If you do, it's okay. People walk in a relaxed way, and you can wish strangers on the street Shabbat Shalom. You can wish the Arabs in the delicatessen Shabbat Shalom, and they take it as a good wish for the weekend. They'll say Shabbat Shalom right back. It's not a problem. And so sort of the Jewish part of me could come out of the closet in Israel. And I also had the idea of bringing the Sufi teaching that I found in Canada to Israel. And maybe it would be a bridge between Jews and Christians and Muslims. And I came to understand fairly quickly once I came to Israel that that's not the first frontier. That's not where the peace has to begin. The peace has to begin between secular and religious people within Israel. And then maybe that will open doors also with our neighbors. But I understood, there's a peace to begin between Tel Aviv, the secular capital, and Jerusalem, the religious capital of Israel. And after, as I was a graduate student and I helped work with friends, we created an alternative Jewish study center. But after 7 years, it's sort of, we say in Hebrew, the asimon dropped. We used to have coins you put in the phone. I don't have an expression like that in English, but I got it. I got the point. And it's just that I've been running a spiritual bookstore in Canada. This could be my contribution to life in Jerusalem, a store with no axe to grind. We're not trying to convert. We're not trying to make secular people religious. we are trying to give non-religious people access to good spiritual perspectives on Judaism, access to Jewish spirituality, and at the same time give Jewish people Rumi and access to good Sufi sources and yoga and Buddhism. And we're certainly not involved with who should win the war, Buddhism or yoga. We're not involved with Judaism or Sufism either. It's all there, and I'm very interested and fairly knowledgeable. So you can talk to me about all these kinds of things and New Age, okay? And it was a great vocation.
That's
not be a very easy way to make a living, but it was a great vocation in terms of.
I heard that Israel is a very expensive place to live in.
Oh boy. Yeah. Rent is very high. Food tends
property prices are very high. Rent is very high.
Yeah, I got lucky as I approached the retirement age, which is 67 for men in this country, 65 for women. I was researching these things, and for the last year and a half, I've had a one-room studio apartment in a kind of retirement home for immigrants from overseas in Israel. 85% of the people in this building are Russian speakers. It's a little bit strange for me. There's a French-speaking woman across the hall. There's one or two English speakers actually in the building. But the shared language is Russian. There's a Lubavitcher synagogue right beneath me. But I have a beautiful view of the Arab village nearby right out my window. I can see the minarets of two mosques, and I hear the call to prayer. And beautiful trees and gardens all around. And a wonderful place to sit and write, which is what I want to be doing. I still have to put all my books away. It's taken me a while. But so I have a very reasonable place, very inexpensive. So I've been given a certain respect as, I guess, an elder in the community. Similarly, I was very lucky with this. They took the old Ottoman Railroad station in Jerusalem, the first station, which is near the neighborhood where I had my bookstore, which is a very pluralistic neighborhood where you'll find holistic healing and yoga classes and alternative synagogues, which is very important, creative synagogues, and synagogues that are very welcoming to Christians and Muslims if they should want to join us for prayer. And I located my bookstore in that location. It took some studying Jerusalem to understand. You put it in the wrong neighborhood, and you'll have problems with the ultra-Orthodox neighbors. There's no question about it. I found the right neighborhood, and all kinds of people put their notices up on my bulletin board for holistic healing and things like that. And similarly, this train station, which has become a place of restaurants and craft stores and stands and stalls and things like that, became a. First, I was in a large bar that didn't work out so well, but then I was given a booth that kind of closes up at night, and I can play my music and put out a table and display my favorite books and have the other books in the stall, and have a view of the sunset every day. So it's quite lovely by the old railroad station. A bike path right in front of my store. So Baruch Hashem, alhamdulillah.
Do you know one thing, Yaqub, that we Pakistanis, we don't recognize Israel, and we don't have any diplomatic ties with Israel, but still we have a Sufi property in Jerusalem, in Israel. Yeah, there is a place of Baba Farid of Patan.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, the biggest, one of the biggest Sufi Sheikh, whose shrine is in Pakistan, in Patan. So he had a wonderful place there. It was known as the Chilaga of Baba Farid in Jerusalem. So we Pakistani, we do have a Sufi property there. And
nice. Come visit.
Yeah, sure. I'll not only come and visit, I'll claim the ownership of that property for Pakistanis. Because right now, Indians are taking care of that property.
Oh, well, you have your
And
own issue there, I suppose. Yes.
we have love and hate relationship between
Right.
the India and Pakistan. So it goes on. But tell me, Yaqub, as you are now having a shop, which is a spiritual kind of bookshop, has a uh, Jewish spiritual section, Kabbalah section, Sufi section, and what are the trends of youth nowadays? Are they going towards? Are they keen to learn about Sufism, Sufi literature?
Yes, there's ongoing interest in Sufism. My
That's wonderful.
project came up as a surprise. I have my own English translation. I've worked with a Turkish friend on Yunus Emre,
Yeah.
my beloved poet. That's my favorite poet.
Ah.
And and kind of coming after Rumi. Literally, he was probably studied with Rumi, not as his sheikh, but in a literary sense, studied with
Hmm.
Rumi.
Hmm.
Um, but stuck to Turkish instead of going to Persian, and more down to earth and kind of a shamanic
Hmm.
vision that I think comes out of Central Asian shamanism that the Turks carried with them. That maybe as a Native American, somebody born in America, I kind of resonate with,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
beautiful.
Hmm.
It's part of the spiritual vision.
Hmm.
Anyway, I thought I should be working on that. And this young
Hmm.
Israeli guy doesn't call me up. He sends me an email. He says, I just translated The Gift, the big book by Coleman Barks of
Hmm.
poetry of Hafiz. Um, he says, are you interested in publishing it?
Hmm.
I say, well, send me some poems. Actually, I avoided it for a couple of weeks during
Hmm.
the closure when we were all in, what do you call it in English? Bidud. We were all shut down.
Hmm.
I can't get by on one language anymore. I need two languages. That's what happens when you live in a place like this. But I sort of ignored it for a couple of weeks, and then something kept bugging me and saying, take a look at this guy's email. And I
Hmm.
wrote him back. I said, you have some poems? And he sent me some poems, and they were great. I
Yeah.
loved them in Hebrew, his translations.
Hmm.
And it turned out we had a lot of work to do to continue editing them a bit
Hmm.
and polishing them a bit. And inshallah, in the next week or two, I'm going to the printer. We're going to come out with a book in
That's
Hebrew,
wonderful.
Matana, the gift of Hafiz.
That's
So
wonderful. That's
that's
wonderful.
just an example. He was motivated. He came from a
Hmm.
religious background. He speaks in his introduction of some basic Kabbalistic concepts, such as
Hmm.
Leita Tarpanui, meaning there is no place
Hmm.
vacant of him. There's no place where God's presence is not. God's presence is
Hmm. Hmm.
everywhere. And Hasidic idea of dveikut, of you're like ishq, it's like glue, it's like you're
Yeah.
sticking yourself to God, your attachment to God. But he found these accessible in Hafiz and not,
Hmm.
kind of part of a complex
Hmm.
religious fabric that speaks to him. So he's an example of an Israeli, actually one who is still a bit in touch with his religious roots, has
Yeah.
left practice of Judaism behind,
Hmm.
but has a spiritual search and inclination.
Hmm.
And just as I feel personally that Yunus is a friend of mine on the path, he has found that kind of relationship, personal relationship with Hafiz.
Hmm.
Beautiful.
Hmm.
I support it. Lovely.
Hmm. Yeah.
If I can make a living, publishing this is
Hmm.
great. This is the kind of service I want to do. So that's just an example. There's a
Yeah.
Sufi festival in Israel every year. It had to be canceled this year because of the virus, but
Yeah.
1,000 Israelis get together and hear a little bit about Sufi teaching, hear a lot of Sufi music. Um, I I both lecture there and I set up a bookstall there and sell books, and there's a lot of interest.
Hmm.
So there is interest, and it makes sense. There's spiritual interest. The Jewish people have had a relationship with God for what is it,
Hmm.
3,000-4,000 years, for heaven's sakes. It's pretty
Hmm.
deep in our blood, in the cells of
Hmm.
our body.
Hmm.
We have a dialectical relationship with our religion.
Hmm.
Um, you want to call it love hate? I would say it's more. There's love and there's resistance to too
Hmm.
much outward orthodoxy, and
Hmm.
um, but people are searching for what's behind that, and there's always been I think the New Age has kind of gone down a bit, but there's interest in yoga, there's interest in Buddhism and meditation, and that continues. And there's this strong attraction to Sufism because it's monotheistic. It's simple. It's about one God. It's more about divinity than God as a person, maybe. That makes sense. The Quran already does some of that transition from a personal to a more impersonal sense of God. And not everybody's aware that it's even connected to Islam. Part of my role as an educator, the way I see it is like this, if I don't mind if non-Jews get interested in Kabbalah, I'm happy to see that, but I want them to give respect that this is a Jewish tradition. This is a sacred part of Judaism. I imagine our Muslim neighbors should feel the same way. They should be willing to share the essence of Sufism with non-Muslims, but they want the Islam to be respected. It grew up through Islam. It's an expression of Islam. It should be respected. Part of my role as a publisher is just to put in that reminder, let people be aware that this is the tradition, and it's also in a hope that our neighbors, instead of feeding their identity by anti-Zionism, can feed their identity by being proud of their Sufi heritage. Yeah, as a matter of fact, your Jewish neighbors, a lot of us admire that. You should be proud of that. You might even teach us something about that. We're interested. Can we communicate about these things? Maybe we can be friends. Maybe we can share something. Maybe there's a reason we're together in the Middle East. So I think maybe that's somewhere you wanted to go. But okay, there we go.
I know. I was just thinking about Yunus today. There is basically a television series has made by Turkish television.
Right, Netflix.
I guess Netflix or somewhere. But we got that television series in Pakistan translated in Urdu. And today, the Prime Minister of Pakistan recommended people who are having interest in Sufism that they should watch that series in Urdu. So Pakistan is a Sufi country with a Sufi orientation, with a Sufi oriented leadership, political leadership. And I guess as I advocate all the time that Sufi diplomacy is the need of the time. Like you rightly mentioned, that there are so many common grounds between Sufi communities on both part of our worlds. That like in your country, in my country, if we want to seek a common ground, Sufism perhaps the first one.
Yes.
Where you and me, we can sit together very comfortably. We can have our, by the way, one of our common friend, Dr. Michael Brack, he told me the story about the coffee, that it was a Sufi drink.
Yes.
It is still a Sufi drink. So we both Sufis can sit together. We can share the Sufi drink coffee together, and we can open our hearts to one another. And that's where the relationship starts to, we can start building the relationship. And that's how people go forward.
Do you know the Sufi story about coffee?
Yeah, he told me. But I would love to hear from you as well.
Okay, well, I heard it from the Shadoli Tariqat, which was the Tariqat of my first Sheikh Sidi. There was the shepherd discovered these berries that his sheep were eating. I think Sidi told us the story that these sheep, they eat the berries and they jump. So he came to the Prophet Muhammad. Is this was it to the Prophet Muhammad or was it to the Sheikh? It became to the Sheikh. Yeah, because it's later than Muhammad. Comes to the Sheikh and he says, "Is this min Allah or is this min shaitan?" And the Sheikh says, "Okay, thank you for your question. I will pray on this. I will ask." And he took the jar with coffee beans and he put it under his head as he went to sleep that night. And he dreamt of the Prophet Muhammad. And in the tradition, if you dream of Muhammad, it is Muhammad. The shaitan can't take the form of the Prophet. And the Prophet comes and he says, "Take these beans and cook them, make a beverage for your dervishes so they can stay up all night and zikr Allah.
Hmm.
So that's the kosher stamp of the Prophet Muhammad, I guess
Ah,
halal stamp on coffee.
yeah,
It's good for zikr. It's a
yeah,
good thing.
yeah. It's very good thing. And the day I came to know that it's a Sufi drink, I started loving coffee. Otherwise,
Uh,
I used to say that I don't like coffee and kufi. Kufis referring to the Karbala issue, the people of Kufa. That
okay,
I don't like kufis and I don't like coffee as well.
okay, good.
But now I love coffee because
And
it's
you
a
love
Sufi
coffee.
drink.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So it is interesting to
for me,
know
it's the
about
drug
the
of choice.
present culture.
Excuse me.
Present culture. I said it is interesting to know about the present culture of Sufism in Jerusalem and in Israel. Uh, what about this yoga kind of trend? It is, it is now in. It is very in. People are very much into yoga things. Like in 70s, there was a hippie culture. So
I was
people
part of it.
used
Yeah.
to, yeah, in 70s they used to enjoy their freedom with the slogans and with they synchronized their freedom with the hippieism. So now
Well,
people synchronized their health care or somehow their exercise routine with the yogaism.
for
So
some of us, this is not new. I
yeah,
started doing a little bit of hatha yoga in the morning back in the 70s.
that's right.
It stayed with me through my whole life. So
Hmm,
there are many of us, and
yeah,
I know people who are more serious about yoga than I am. It's not my main
hmm,
tradition, it's spiritual tradition, but a little bit of yoga. Now I'm having trouble with my arm, so I'm not doing it so much. But it's
hmm,
been with me for many years. So
hmm.
yeah, these are basic things.
So
Um,
people are now going towards yoga as well. The young people.
I don't know. I don't have a way as much as measuring that. I don't have a store now. I don't. Um, who was it? There were a couple of Russian women came by my store yesterday and bought a book about Buddha and love.
Hmm,
Um, there is interest in the Eastern traditions. There remains interest. I'm not sure it's a growing thing.
hmm.
I can tell you about the Sufi festival because it happens every year. It didn't happen this year, but it's happened for
Oh,
like
wonderful, wonderful.
year after year after year. 1,000 Israelis come interested. They've all heard of Rumi. They've heard of something like that, whirling dervishes,
Hmm,
and they have some attraction, some interest in Sufism.
hmm.
And so this is part of, you know,
That's wonderful. I would love to be part
culture.
of that festival as soon as this COVID scene gets off and we will be back in normal life. I would love to be a part of that festival.
Yeah. I have to say,
Hmm,
we had some Arab Sufi friends who used to come,
hmm,
but because it's an Israeli festival,
hmm,
that means women dancing in sort of a provocative way, some of them.
hmm,
And the festival people didn't want to at all make people uncomfortable how they dress or how they dance. So
hmm,
we've kind of lost our Arab Muslim, most of our Arab Muslim, participants
hmm, hmm,
because it's just not modest enough. So
hmm,
it's a factor to weigh. But if you're
hmm,
interested in talking with Israelis who are interested in Sufism,
hmm,
um, that's a great place. It's a great platform. And some traditional musicians come from other countries.
hmm,
It's an interesting scene. It's
hmm.
Gil Ron Shema is one of the organizers, and he's been involved in the building bridges between Israeli culture and Sufism and other things for many years. So
Hmm.
it's interesting.
That's
Yeah,
wonderful. That's
yeah,
wonderful. I'm very
yeah.
thankful, Yaqub, that you have spared your time and we had some technical issues and this podcast got late for almost one hour and still you joined us. I'm really thankful for your participation in this podcast and giving time and being with us and hope to see you soon.
Good. Do we have a little more time, or we need to wrap up now?
We have almost 10 minutes. If you want to share
Oh,
something, you're Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little more about Yunus Emery, since
Yeah.
you brought
Please,
it up
please
as
go
well.
ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
That's a
Yunus
topic of
Emery is a
interest
very
for me.
interesting, talking
Yeah.
about bridging secular and religious.
Hmm.
I actually read recently that the Ataturk government made a decision to sort of promote Yunus Emery, even though they were suppressing Sufism in the early 20th century.
Hmm.
But Yunus has been made a hero of both the secular and the
Hmm.
religious, in
Hmm.
Turkey, certainly.
Hmm.
And I took an interest from a bit of an academic point of view. Can we view this objectively?
Hmm.
What is Yunus advocating?
Hmm.
And I found an interesting complex picture that
Hmm.
he has poems, celebrating getting up at dawn for the dawn prayer and feeling alone with God.
Hmm.
Beautiful poem about that. But he also has poems where he really lashes out against people imposing the 5 pillars of Islam on other people.
Hmm.
He doesn't like that. He doesn't like imposing 5 prayers a day on other people. Doesn't think people should be doing that.
Hmm.
And says it in very strong language. And I think if you're looking for an essential Sufism that affirms the essence of Islam, but
Hmm.
also is critical of people imposing religion on other people,
Hmm.
you find that in Yunus Emery.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so I think he actually is a key. He has a key for helping us overcome the schizophrenia between
Hmm.
being overly religious or overly secular,
Yeah.
and getting a communication between those two sides within ourselves, first of all, each
Hmm.
person in their own way,
Hmm.
and within our culture. And that's part of the reason I've published his teachings in Hebrew.
That's
A
wonderful.
friend of mine translated, and I made
Hmm.
sure to publish it. And I actually made an edition of his book in English. Is this it here? And no, this is the Hebrew one. Just
Hmm.
leave it here for a second. And the English one, that's the old edition of the Hebrew. Well, it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Uh, and the English one, I sold out. I just printed them in Israel, and I sold, a few hundred copies in English. But I need to do a new edition and get it out on the internet. And you can do that these days without a
Hmm.
lot of money if you can position things
Yeah.
right. I really need to get my Yunus Emery book out there. Now, one
Hmm.
of the things I learned, Murat used to tell these Bektashi Turkish Sufi folk tales about Yunus Emery.
Hmm.
And I came to understand that they're beautiful stories, they're very interesting stories. They give you a lot of insight into Turkish Sufism. And most
Hmm.
of them are not historically likely.
Hmm.
Like in New Testament scholarship, what's convenient for the church, they say, is suspect. What's not convenient for the church is very likely to be authentic in the Gospels.
Hmm.
Well, too many of these stories are too convenient for the Bektashis. And it looks like there was a kind of competition, a friendly competition between the
Hmm.
Bektashis and the Levis, which, from my Jewish point of view,
Hmm.
wonderful. That's like Midrash. We have different interpretations of the stories, and you
Yeah.
tell yours and I tell mine, and the audience
Yeah.
decides. It's not theology. We don't kill each other over this. We kind of
Exactly.
have fun with it. And they've been
Yeah.
doing that in Turkey for a long time. It's wonderful.
Hmm.
So I haven't watched much of the Netflix series on Yunus Emery, but it seems very far from this literature, actually. I don't know where they got Yunus Emery as an educated judge. That doesn't make sense
Hmm.
to me. He was a simple person,
Hmm.
um, and the tales that are told may overdo his simplicity. But I don't think he was an educated person the way Rumi was a
Hmm.
product of the academic world of Islam in his time, and he was
Yeah.
basically a madrasa professor. He was a college professor.
Yeah.
Yunus was not like that,
Hmm.
but he did know a lot of Arabic and Persian because it worked its way into his Turkish.
Hmm.
So it's an interesting. He wasn't just a country bumpkin either.
Hmm.
So these questions interest me. Getting at who really was Yunus Emery, who was the
Hmm.
historical Yunus Emery, and
Hmm.
what can he teach us about finding harmony between the religious and the modern aspects of ourselves
Hmm.
uh, in the mirror of this Sufi friend of God.
Hmm.
So I love that.
That's great. That's great. And that's an inspiring character, Yunus Emre. That's a very inspiring character. So, Yaqub, I'm really thankful for your participation in this podcast, being my guest in this podcast, and hope to see you soon.
Good. Let's stay in touch, and maybe we'll think of some more questions and go a little deeper.
Yeah, sure. In
Okay.
next,
Well, thank you for inviting me all the way from Pakistan. Wow.
thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful. It was wonderful to have you. Thank you and stay blessed.
Okay. Thank you, and I welcome you to Jerusalem whenever you can make it here.
Surely, very soon. Surely,
Good.
very soon.
And all of our friends. When things are normal,
Yeah.
we have Arab pilgrims, of course, come to Jerusalem
Mm,
in the first station, which was originally built by the Ottoman Turks. We
mm,
have lots of Muslims and Christian visitors and
mm,
Jews
mm,
all mingling and enjoying themselves, and we actually have a large tent with
mm,
a picture of people in namaste pose, but
mm,
Christian, and a Muslim, and a Jew, and African, and all different cultures, and with the quotation from the Hebrew prophet, "My house shall be a house of prayer for all people."
mm,
So this is the vision that is being held very much at the first station, and
mm,
it's a place where all kinds of people can feel comfortable, and it's just down the hill from there to the old city,
mm.
to the Temple Mount, and yeah, it's beautiful. Jerusalem is wonderful.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It is one of the wonderful
It's a
cities.
picture of the greater whole, and just
Yeah.
it's a small picture in the heart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good. God bless.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.